Hello Almal. Hey everybody. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing 2023 book review. So this year I read about 29 books, and I'm going to give you a little snippet about them so that you can maybe read a couple if you were interested in them. So I've got my Goodreads list up here. I'm going to go through and I'm going to tell you what I read and give you a few sentences about it and my thoughts on it so that maybe it will inspire you to read something new. So first book I read this year was The Stormkeeper's Island by Catherine Doyle. It was okay. It's middle grade fiction, some magic realism. It was good. It wasn't great. But if you're a middle grade reader and you like islands and the ocean, it could be fun. Next was A Glasshouse of Stars by Shirley, Marr. Good. This was a good one. This is again a middle grade, but it is odd because it is in the second person. So it says, you do this, you do that, you go here. Which at first was a little off-putting, like I didn't like it, and I almost didn't finish reading it, because I almost didn't continue reading it after the first chapter because I was like, I really like this is weird. But then I pushed on and I got used to it, and I actually really love this book. It's about a young girl that moves to Australia, I believe it is. It's not so specific, so I don't think it says where she comes from. I think she comes from like Vietnam or something. But her family moves, and so she has a different culture at home than she does where she's moved to, and so she's learning a new language. But it's you are doing this, and so it's very personal. And I think that it's a really great book to teach kids empathy for people who are in other countries and that do have to move around for different reasons. It also has some magic realism. So she's in this house that she's like, sure, it grows and contracts as needs be, and there's a magical greenhouse in the backyard, and so very interesting, well written, wonderful book. I definitely recommend that. On to number 3, The House in the Cerulean Sea by Klune. I can't say anything about this book except for it's sweet. It is a sweet book. Even the Antichrist is sweet in this book. It's about a guy who's like auditing an orphanage for magical orphans, and there's like the Antichrist and a gnome and I think a pixie and some other weird kids. And it's romantic, but it's not a romance per se. And it's a sweet book. It is just, if you want something that is going to, at the end, make you feel good and happy, and this will do it. And I have a feeling that TJ Klune writes a lot of books like that, is what I've heard, is that all of his books are just nice. Then I went on and I read The Girl Who Speaks Bear by Sophie Anderson. So The Girl Who Speaks Bear by Sophie Anderson, and then later on I read The House with Chicken Legs by Sophie Anderson. Love them. Great books. So interesting. They're based on kind of like maybe Russian or more Eastern European folklore and folktales. So The House with Chicken Legs, that's a reference to Baba Yaga. I guess she lives in a house with chicken legs, and sometimes it just gets up and walks away. And that Baba Yaga is not a terrible witch. She is a guider of the souls of the dead. And she has a daughter, Sophie. No, sorry. That's the author, Sophie Anderson. She has a daughter that she's teaching to be a Yaga, basically. And the house has personality, and it's very interesting. And The Girl Who Speaks Bear, again, like the girl turns into a bear, and it's based off of this, some old folklore, and just the characters are really well done, and it's very atmospheric, and both of those books by Sophie Anderson are very good. Then I wandered into a bookstore and bought this book and didn't read it. Didn't read anything about it. Just was like, ooh, shiny, and it's a bookstore and I like it. And so I bought it, and then I found out that this is number 3 in the series. And so then I had to go get the other 2. And I'm so glad that I did. So The first one is The House at the Edge of Magic, and then there's The Tower at the End of Time, and then this one is The Bookshop at the Back of Beyond. They're all by Amy Sparks. Loved it. I'm probably going to do a whole book review on this series, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but if you like middle grade fantasy and silly things, I'll just tell you there's a toilet that like runs around, like hops away and giggles. So lots of fun things in there. So that's a good one. And so that heads up that trilogy. Then I decided I'll be an adult and I'll read an adult book. And so I read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. It was fine. It was interesting. I liked the concept. I used to work in a library, so I was like, ooh, a library. You know, I didn't know what it was. I was just like, oh, a library at midnight. What's going to go on here? And that's not quite what was going on. It's a little bit more cerebral, thinking about your place in life and how you fit into the world. So not my favorite book, but also not a bad book. A lot of people like it. Then I went on to The Midnighters by Hana Tooke. Awesome. I've also read The Unadoptables by Hana Tooke. Loved that. I love her characters. I like the weird situations they get into. So The Midnighters, it's about this like midnight guild kind of thing. I'm not even sure how to describe it. So it's not magic. They use science to make magic, if that makes sense. And they put on these like elaborate festivals every new moon or full moon. I forget what it was. And just the characters are really good. It's not fantasy, but it feels fantastical. And yeah, she's just an excellent writer, middle grade fiction. Again, The Unadoptables, nothing in those books are fantasy per se, but they feel fantastic, if that makes sense. So those are two good books. Then I went on to The Miniaturist by Jessie Brown. So that is set in the 1600s in Amsterdam. So I live in a town outside of Amsterdam. So anytime I find a book set in the Netherlands, I'm like, ooh, gotta read that. So I read it and it was interesting. It's one that gives you a good historical perspective. It's a little bit of creep in there, a little creepy, a little upsetting. It's not a happy book, but interesting. And I know that there's a sequel to it and maybe I'll read it. We'll find out. After that was The Grace of Wild Things by Heather Fawcett. Now, I'm a fan of Heather Fawcett. Love her stuff. She wrote Ember, it's about a dragon, and then, she's written also The Language of Ghosts. I love that one. She wrote a YA. I have to look it up. That was really good. Love her stuff. Something about her writing style though, like the first couple chapters of the book, I'm always like, I don't know about this. But by the end, I'm like, love it. Greatest thing ever. So it's the Grace of Wild Things is about this girl who has some magic and she wants to become a witch. She like wants to be a bad witch. And she runs away from an orphanage and she finds this crotchety old witch to like, and basically pushes herself into the house and says, I'm living here, you're and makes herself the witch's apprentice. And yeah, it's interesting. It was a coming of age story for kind of a little witchy girl. Well done. I liked it. Then I read The King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. Yeah, romantasy. On the spice level, I'd give it a 4. So yeah, if you're into that kind of thing, you'll be into that kind of thing. It's not the best writing. It's not the greatest, most unique and interesting thing in the world, but it's fun. Next is Sherlock Holmes and the Christmas Demon by James Lovegrove. Again, so it's not by Conan Doyle, but they use the characters of Sherlock Holmes and Watson. And the Christmas Demon is kind of like Krampus, but he's in Northumbria or something. Comes around Christmas, freaks people out. There's a mystery to solve. It's a good mystery. Then I went on the nonfiction route and did Everything is Effed by Mark Manson. He also wrote the The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. And it says it's called A Book About Hope. And so I thought like, oh, okay, this will be a nice hope. It's not a helpful book. It's like everything is terrible and you should have hope, but it just didn't make me feel much better. I was hoping for something different. It was interesting. There was lots of interesting facts in there, but I can't say that I was like happy at the end of reading that. Okay, now this is the one I'm going to get some flack for this. Then I read A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, and I give it a 3. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever read. It was interesting. It was fine. I am not a huge fan of it. I was not like, oh my gosh, I need to read all the rest of it. I was like, okay, this is a fine fantasy kind of romance. Yeah, it was a romance. Spice level is low. It's the characters basically frustrate me whenever I'm like yelling at a book going, don't do it, oh, why, what's wrong with you? So that kind of was annoying, but I liked some of the drama towards the end. I think it got a little bit better. It was like more dramatic, a little more fast paced. It was a little slow in the beginning. I will say that I have heard that the books get spicier as you go through. So if you like read the first one and you're like, oh, this is my level of spiciness, I'm okay with this. Watch out, because I heard that they get more. I haven't read the rest of them, but it's just what I heard. So don't come at me if you're a big Court of Thorns and Roses person. It was okay. Then I went to A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. And it was a nice read. It wasn't the greatest thing I've ever read, but it wasn't terrible. It's about kind of like this magic, it's like soft magic on an island. I'm thinking someplace in Ireland, and there's a divide, and so there's a rivalry between the two sides, and they have different kinds of magic or different availabilities of magic, and it was okay. It wasn't the greatest thing, but it also wasn't terrible. So if you're into fantasy, it's a nice read. Then I went on to Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. Everybody's reading Pachinko. It is one of those books where I'm glad I read it. I did not enjoy it while I was reading it. I would not really recommend it, but I'm glad that I read it because now I have more knowledge about Korea and Koreans living in Japan and the history and the tension and stuff. But it wasn't a happy book. So it's kind of like if you're interested in that and you want to learn a bit more about that time period and the people, then it's a really in-depth book. But if you just want to sit down and read something happy, this is not it. Then I wanted something, and I was just like, I'm just gonna get something silly, and I found The Devil on Llamas Night at Llamas. And it's Llamas, and my husband kept going like, oh, where's the llama? When does the llama come in? Like, there's no llama. There is a cat possessed by a demon. There should be more of that cat in here. That would be better. So this is written in like the 70s. And it is of its time, but it was a fun read. It's like, there's this guy and he's like a priest of a satanic cult, but like their forward facingness is a health food group, and they kind of take over this castle. It's really kind of funny, but there's a lot of people and a lot of stuff happens. Even though it's a pretty short book, I was entertained. So I had very low expectations, and it exceeded my expectations, which were very low. So it's fun. So just, sometimes you just got to pick up the really random things and go for it. And so I actually liked it. Then I went on to None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. If you like being creeped out, this is a good book. One of the main characters is really creepy, and you just get this ick factor, and it's a mystery, and yeah, not my favorite, but entertaining, and I kind of couldn't put it down. Then I went on to Bravely by Maggie Stiefvater. Yeah. So this is kind of a continuation of Merida's story from Brave, the Pixar movie. She's now in her 20s and she is trying, so she like has a run-in with Feridach, which is the like Celtic god of destruction, and oh, I forget what the other goddess's name was. So it's about like destruction and renewal and changing and learning and growing and yeah, so I thought it was really well written. I really liked it. It was very interesting. So again, it's like YA fantasy, but there's yeah, so YA fantasy. So if you're into that, then you might enjoy it. Then I went on to The Coffee Trader by David Liss. Now, The Coffee Trader, it takes place in the 1680s, 1660s in Amsterdam. And one of the reasons that this one was interesting to me is that it was, it followed a Jewish trader in Amsterdam in the 1600s. And you really got an in-depth look at the different rules and the different societies set for the Jews and then for the local population, the Christians. And everywhere else in Europe at that time, the Jews were being persecuted. So these are predominantly Portuguese Jews, and they were, in the Spanish area, and there was the Spanish Inquisition, and so you couldn't live openly as Jews. But in Amsterdam and the Netherlands, you could live openly as Jews, but you still had to follow certain rules. And so it's a really in-depth, like, yeah, they're trading coffee, and that's kind of interesting about how, like, maybe coffee became a thing. But it's really more about the differences in the societies and the intricacies of that kind of the different lives. So interesting. Then I went on to The Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. I picked this up because it's set in Edinburgh, and I used to study in Edinburgh, and I love Edinburgh. And so anytime I find a book set in Edinburgh, I'm like, Mom, on it. This is kind of like a post-apocalyptic Edinburgh, and the main character can talk to ghosts. So very different, and she's like very poor, really scrapping to get by. Life is hard. And it gets weird. And so it's very like supernatural, ghosty stuff. So fun. And it really fits with the vibe of Edinburgh. If you've ever been to Edinburgh, it is kind of a creepy place, and they're okay with that. Then I went on to Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This is a YA. The main character is in love with a guy, and he's about to marry someone else. So she goes to like a god or a fate, and makes a deal with him, and he's the fate of like the Prince of Broken Hearts or something like that. And then all this chaos ensues, and she's turned to stone. And so, not quite a romance, but there's romance elements, and there's a lot of fantasy. Fun book. After that, went back to the very real world of Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. Great book. So I definitely recommend that you read this book if you are 40 and under, because I think that we as a younger generation have kind of forgot how terrible it was for women back in the 60s and 50s and 40s and like anything before that. So it's set in the 50s and early 60s, and you just get all this misogyny, and this lady's life is just difficult because she's eccentric and she wants to be a scientist, and all the guys are like, women can't do that, and she's like, F you dudes. So yeah, it's a really good book, and I think it's a really good reminder that things were a lot harder. They're not perfect now, but they were a lot worse at one point. Then went on to something very different from that. A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon. by Sarah Hawley. And this is what I would call a cozy romantasy. So romance fantasy, because it's set in this place called Glimmer Falls, which is like, it has all of these witches and other magical creatures like naiads that swim in the river and pixies and stuff. And it's about a witch who accidentally summons a demon, and then they're stuck together. So it's fantasy, but it's not out slaying dragons or anything. So it's a cozy fantasy, and then it's a romance. And I would give it a spice level of like 3 or 4. It's detailed, but not weird stuff. Then it would be like too high up there. But definitely, if you don't like spice, then this is not the one for you. But if you do, there's this one, and then apparently 2 more in the series. Then I got The House of Hidden Wonders. And again, I picked this up because it's set in Edinburgh. And I love Edinburgh because I used to live there. And this one I really enjoyed because it's set in the 1860s in Edinburgh, and one of the characters is Arthur Conan Doyle. So the guy who goes on to later write Sherlock Holmes. And he actually was a medical student in the 1860s or whatever in Edinburgh at the Royal College of Surgeons. And I used to volunteer at Surgeons Hall, which is the museum attached to the Royal College of Surgeons. So I have a soft spot for that. And then the young orphan girls that are the protagonist of this book, they live in Mary King's Close, and you really get an idea, a sense of what it would have been like to live in Edinburgh at that time with the terrible living conditions if you were super poor and you couldn't afford anything. And so, yeah, it's got some good commentary. It's good. Got some history in there, but it's also a mystery and very dramatic. And I really liked it. So I recommend that one if you're into middle grade fiction. Then I went on to A Darkening of Dragons by S.A. Patrick. I thought this was just going to be like a retelling of the Hamlin Piper, the Pied Piper tale, but it actually references that as something that happened 10 years beforehand. And at first I was like, oh, it's a little boring, it's a little slow. But then it just got better and better and really interesting. And there's a half griffin, half dragon, so a dragogriff, and there's a girl who gets turned into a rat, and, you know, interesting characters, dramatic storyline, interesting concepts that I enjoyed. And so that's number 1, called Songs of Magic. And so there's more to it. I haven't gotten to those yet, but again, a fun, interesting middle grade high fantasy, I would call it. Then after that, I wanted something a little easier. It's the end of the year. I wanted to just end on a simple note. And so I grabbed, this is Lupo and the Secrets of Windsor Castle. So Lupo is the Cocker Spaniel for the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. So they set him to find a mystery, to solve a mystery in Buckingham Palace. And this reminded me of The Royal Rabbits of London. Which that series, if you know that series, there's like these highly trained MI5 rabbits that live in burrows under Buckingham Palace, and they keep the royal family safe. And so this is another animals keeping the palace safe. So it's a fun one. It's not the greatest book in the world, but it is a nice middle grade read. Entertaining, and if your kids or you have any reference to Buckingham Palace, you've been there, you've seen it, then that is going to be a fun thing. And so that's the last one that I'm reading. I'm going to finish out this year, and then I'll have a new slate of reading in 2024. I'm going to be posting some videos on having you help me pick out what to read. So if I've got those up, then they'll be somewhere, maybe. I'll see if I can figure out how to do that. All right, well, thanks for watching.